Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on Talk Radio AM 640.
I'm the guy they call the Spaceman. This is A View from Space. I'd like to welcome you in. If you're driving around town right now listening to AM 640, picking up the signal there, I welcome you in. Or if you're at work listening via the AM 640 app, I welcome you in too. Or if you're listening right now on Shaw Direct on channel 865, picking up the show there, I welcome you in. Or if you're listening to me on your 3 or 4G personal communication device via the Stream the World software, I welcome you in too. And I welcome you in if you're listening in what some call the best seat in the house, bar none. Sitting from your Mac, your PC at home, logged on to 640toronto.com, picking up the live audio streaming there. I welcome you in. Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you in. There is nothing new under the sun. It's simply history repeating itself again this week. It was the Illuminati-controlled mass media stating ISIS had taken over the ancient city of Palmyra and were destroying all the ancient monuments and artifacts from man's history. It's past the Mesopotamian time, the Sumerian time, all the way back to those days. The storied, historic human past was being destroyed by ISIS. There is nothing new. Palmyra, located 130 clicks. That's a hidden 13, by the way. 130 clicks from Damascus, Syria. Was located in the Homs province of Syria. It's always been a target for every religion ever to seize control of, to occupy it. Why? Because it was the home, the very first, the earliest home of all religions, paganism. The Temple of Baal is located there. The city was supposedly built by King Solomon to worship the devil god Baal. The temple still stands today, despite all the religious powers through the centuries that occupied it. Will ISIS demolish the Temple of Baal? I highly doubt it. It will never happen. It was built back 3 centuries before Christ. It still stands. After all of those powers of religion rolled through, the Romans in 272, the Sassanids of Persia 227 before that, the Muslims in 634 AD, as Muhammad sends his top general Khalid ibn al-Walid to destroy all pagan monuments and artifacts in the city of Palmyra. History repeated itself again this week, but the Temple of Baal, I can assure you, will stay. Palmyra is an ancient city located, like I said, 130 quick ones from Damascus, once dubbed the Bride of the Desert, a vital stop for ancient caravans crossing the Syrian desert. Supposedly fortified, as I said, built partially by Solomon when he took it over. And the god Baal worshipped there, as they still do today. The Illuminati, I mean. That is one of their great heritage sites, and that's why it is a United Nations heritage site. Oh, yes. Half Greek, half Arab Queen Zenobia, and possibly half Jewish, actually claimed to be descended from Cleopatra. Palmyra actually means palm trees because of the oasis just on the edge of the Syrian desert. She was the ruler there, conquered most of Anatolia in those days, Asia Minor, back in 270, declared its independence from Rome, and Rome, with Mark Antony, one day tried to attack it and knock it over and was repelled. But the Christians, the Muslims, and the sun-worshipping Persian Sassanids all had a shot at controlling Palmyra. And nothing changes today because it's just Islam again, under the guise of ISIS, doing what it did in 634 A.D. It's amazing, isn't it? The Temple of Baal still stands today in Palmyra, that city. Why? The hidden powers that be want it that way. The first ever temple to honor and worship their god Baal is an integral part of the real powers, the Illuminati's religion. Sun worship. Another god this week, too, accompanied this ISIS story that has history repeating itself, dominating the week. Yes, it was another one of those stories of the transformation of man to God. Can you guess who I'm talking about? The god of comedy, of course, was made a god, a master of the comedy gods this week. David Letterman, a comedy god, after 33 years. See, 33 is the highest possible level one can reach, signifying enlightenment in Freemasonry. So David Letterman is made a god doing comedy for 33 years. The god Letterman's last show was on a Wednesday. Most people wondered, why on a Wednesday, which is in the middle of the week? You would think that you would, on your last run, finish the week out. Well, that wasn't in the cards, so to speak. Well, it wasn't in the numerology. That's the reason why the numbers had to be right with this transformation of this man, God, to God of the master of gods of comedy. The transformation, the enlightenment, the lifting up for this one to be above all the others. Let me explain. Wednesday's date was May 20th. May is the 5th month of the year. The 20th day reduces to a 2. So 5 plus 2, 7. 7, the number of spirit. Because it was a spiritual event. This comedy god was having his final communion with his worshipers in his sacred temple. His followers saw him perform on a 7-day, a day of spirit. There's more, though. Just listen. If you add the year to the date May 20, that I just broke down for you numerologically, 2015, 5th month plus 2, now the year added 2015, 2015, it produces a 15, which reduces to a 6. The number of man. Man gets to see their God and have communion with him on the very last possible day that you could put a 6 and a 7 in. May 20th, a Wednesday, marking that final day that the worshipers would gather in the presence of their man God, Letterman, and partake in communion with him. Wait, there's even more, because this was a huge event for the Illuminati, this transformation of this god to a master god in comedy. I'm back with that right after the break on Talk Radio AM 640. This is AVFS. I'm the Spaceman, and I'm just getting started. I'm the guy that calls space. This is a View from Space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. I communicate one way only. If you're a regular listener, you know it's by email, space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. They start rolling in before the show even starts, and I thank you so much for the one that you've sent. Well, in the open to the show tonight, I explained a couple of Illuminati events. Palmyra, repeating history, with Islam again in ruining pagan artifacts and statues and monuments. Well, not really. But that's what they're telling you. Well, the Tower of Baal, or Temple of Baal, is still standing. Because the powers want it that way. So David Letterman, transformation from a god to a master god of comedy. It's just another spiritual exercise for you to accept the Savior, the new God, the new man God that is coming with this new system, the new world order. This global governance that's coming will be led by one man. There will be one country in the world. All of it will be one empire, a global empire. And for that righteous one to come, that perfect one, the one the occult world has been waiting for, I believe is here on this earth now, today, and is soon poised to take power. The changes are happening so quickly, and that's why. Because it's all surrounded around this particular event, the coming of this leader, this world savior. But it's the same old story that's being told through time. Satan, masquerading as the savior, comes in and defeats Satan and becomes the ruler. Satan killing Satan. And this man that comes, this Savior of the world, this one to be this all-powerful one, this perfect one with the perfect lineage of the bloodline, to be the world's Antichrist. That's what David Letterman and those ilk of those men becoming gods is all about. That's the ritual. They're repeated over and over. It's a dress rehearsal. David Letterman is merely fulfilling that role this time around. There will be another one until we get to the final one, where we're all so brainwashed to accept man as God, we will accept this coming one to be the supreme God. David Letterman, 33 years, highest level, Freemasonry. He's a god. May 20, last day, breaks down to a 7, number of spirit. Add the year, the number of man. Then, there's more. Yes, marking that final day that the worshippers could gather in the presence of their man, God, Letterman, and he shares his communication. They partake in communion with him. This was, as I said before the break, a huge event in the Illuminati week. And the screens of the Illuminati-controlled mass media for almost 2 weeks hammered, pounded on this Letterman last show, May 20th. Not only was a spiritual day of 7, or the number of man day to add the year, but it was also the 141st day of the year 2015. 141. 141 is a number that reads the same forwards as it does backwards. This is known as a palindrome. A palindrome is a word, phrase, or number, in this case, that reads the same forwards as it does backwards. The Illuminati love palindromes because they're magical. And in the world of numerology, they have magic power. Can turn a man into a god, a master god. That's what happened. The forward represents the physical world we live in. The backward or mirror end, as you read backwards to the front, represents the spirit world. The opposite, the mirror image of the other. In witchcraft, a mirror, of course, is a way to split the world. It's used as a gateway or entrance to the netherworld. And in one of Harry Potter's books, Harry receives a two-way mirror as a present from his godfather, Sirius Black, shortly before his death, that allowed him to communicate with Sirius Black after he died. In another book of Harry Potter's, In Communication with the Dead, it's a very real part, Harry finds the mirror of Erised, which is desire spelled backwards, because witches also love to play with mysterious backward spelling and backward masking and recording, which showed him movie-like images of his dead parents smiling and waving back at him while in paradise. So a palindrome brings together the physical world and the spirit world as one. The god Letterman is the spiritual one. His followers, his worshippers, are the physical ones. The world coming together for the last time for communion with their God. So the Letterman, people who chose the 141st day of the year to end his communion with his followers, literally reenacted this spiritual ritual to the letter. Man, a special event, indeed, for the Illuminati and their religious beliefs. And how did the Illuminati control mass media stretch this event out for almost a couple of weeks? Well, the buzz was all over just who the special fellow gods, the mini-gods, the demigods, how many special guests, and who were they would be guesting on that final handful of shows. Then, just like a soap opera, with a continuing plot storyline, it all led up to the names of the final show's guests, released only on the day of the big finale, the day of the last appearance of this comedy god who would transcend into the master of comedy. They made him into a god, all right, and here's how. Again, it's all done with numbers. The final episode of The Late Show, David Letterman, watched by 13.76 million viewers. Let me roll that number by you one more time. 13.76. That's a double 13. The 7 and 6 are 13. The cult's number, the number of reincarnation, of everlasting life, of one who would ascend to become transformed into a god. That evening audience shared 9.3, earning the show its highest rating since the, 94 Olympics in February of 94. And the show's highest demo numbers in adults, 25 to 54, and adults 18 to 49, since Oprah Winfrey's first Late Show appearance following the end of her feud with Letterman on December of 2005. In a rarity for a late night show, too, more godlike numbers, it was also the highest rated program on network television that night, beating out all primetime shows. Here's another glimpse as to how the Illuminati made that transformation of a Letterman into a god with numbers in the television ratings. This involves Letterman's opposition, the two other comedy gods who are lesser gods and know their place. They helped him out. All they could do was capitulate that night, and I'm talking about Jimmy Kimmel, Conan O'Brien. Both of them said, hey, switch the channel, go watch David Letterman. Space back with more on Talk Radio, AM 640. Letterman, instant god, a master of gods of comedy. I'm the guy that calls Space. It's a view from space, Talk Radio AM 640. You can email me at spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. Thank you so much for the one you've sent. See, the Illuminati would have you believe that the origins of a lot of things on this planet don't always begin on this world. They theorized that astrology, developed as humans, observed the patterns of stars in the night skies and the movements of celestial bodies. They believed that languages were developed from usage over a long period of time, aided by the advancement in methods of recording the different languages via pictures and symbols. What the Illuminati believe themselves to be the truth, and are going to attempt to convince you as well, though a cross between black magic and science is really what it's all about, what humans call knowledge. The Illuminati are going to convince us that it came from the aliens, and this knowledge is not justly distributed on the planet. And so, the Antichrist, I believe, is going to be the liaison between this group, the Anunnaki elite, who were responsible for the creation of the Aztec Mayan calendar, we're told, which, remember, gave that false notion or idea that 2012 would be the last year this planet existed. Yes, I can tell you now that there are many things that are going on that people have no idea what's really happening. A millennia ago, at the time the calendar was supposedly manufactured, the Illuminati believed that their ancestors, the Anunnaki elite, would come back to Earth one day, revisit the past to reset mankind and their history. Yes, a reboot, if you like. And as I've already said, things are changing very quickly. World politics going through a revolutionary change, and a very fast one too, because they're readying you for the one, the supreme one, to make his appearance. It's where many voices are being compressed into a single voice in certain areas. It's as though the minds of the world leaders are beginning to express themselves as one. In the midst of these developments and consolidations, the Illuminati are in conflict over just whose voice, which side of the Brotherhood of the Snake will be the power behind this new global entity, this one world order. Will it be the Law of One, or the sons of Baal, Belial, also known as the Red Dragon or the White Dragon? This was reflected in a movie even. Remember Alice in Wonderland? The Red Queen and the White Queen fight for control of Wonderland. How deep is the rabbit hole? The White Queen comes from the same gene pool as the Red Queen, you see. The White Queen really likes the dark side, but she's so scared of going too far into it that she's made everything appear very light and happy. But she's living in that place out of fear, and she won't be able to control herself. The White Queen has had her crown taken from her, and she's basically powerless to stop her sister's reign of tyranny. Her sister, the Red Queen, is waiting. She's basically taken a vow of nonviolence that she cannot break, and she's waiting for her champion to arrive to help her reclaim her throne. The citizens of the underworld would like to see that happen. They want to see her restored to power because she's kind. Different names for the same power groups of bloodlines, believe me. Goddess worship. The internet is hailed as an awesome technology advancement, but it's also a powerful tool of the ruling elite. Latest on this, I'll refer you to a story just out. Facebook, it's invasive abuse having to do with privacy settings. Used for prying into personals' lives, as well as spying on corporate governments, on corporations, on governments, on religious affairs around the world. By using the internet, anyone, including the agents of the ruling elite, can effectively sponsor, or destroy individuals, groups, states, nations, and entire regions by spreading exaggerations or outright lies about the others. Propaganda. Oh, we're thick in a propaganda war right now for your mind. And after all, the mind is the battlefield for the soul, which is the real target. You see, this kind of power through technology, digital technology, makes the takeover of world politics a reality. Anyone or any group that is a threat to the ruling elite who has all the power or who dares to expose the ruling elite is subjected to abuse, humiliation, ridicule, character assassination, slander, outright lies, and sometimes silenced or just simply discredited in the most nefariously underhanded ways. When these internet-type tactics are ineffective, then the more conventional media are used to spread lies and false evidence to discredit and punish people, individuals, groups, even nation-states that dare to resist the ruling elite. And there also remains the terrorizing tactics of subjecting those who resist to torture, executions, when deemed necessary. Yes, I tell you now, this world is getting so very close to what I would call the brink of outright war declaration, like a major event to come that's soon to come, I'm sure. Now, this formidable enemy of the truth, particularly described in Revelation 12:3, of course, in the King James Version of the Bible, because the Illuminati are going to use that King James Bible as their blueprint to tell you, to make sure that you understand that they're going to actually fake the second coming. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, a great red dragon. It's admitted on all hands that this is the first grand enemy that in gospel times assaulted the Christian church. Now, if the terms in which it's described and deeds are attributed to it are considered, it'll be found that there is a great analogy between it and the first enemy of all that appeared against the ancient church of God soon after the flood, the word dragon. According to the associations currently connected with it, is somewhat apt to mislead you by, well, recalling to your mind the fabulous dragons of the Dark Ages equipped with wings. These are the toys, the stuffed toys right now that are, well, your children are enamored with, that you buy them for gifts. Little dinosaurs, dragons. They're reptiles. They're cold-blooded reptiles. They're reptilian because they represent the reptile tendencies of the Illuminati's cold heart with no conscience. Cold blood. At the time this divine description was given of fabulous dragons of the Dark Ages equipped with wings, the dragons of the Greeks, says Parnasius, was only a large snake, and the context shows that this is the very case here. It was only a large snake. For what in the third verse is called a dragon in Revelation, in the 14th, it's simply described as a serpent. Then the word rendered red actually means fiery, so that the red dragon signifies the fiery serpent, or the serpent of fire. Fire, of course, is the representative of the sun here on earth. Sun worship. Exactly so it appears to have been in the first form of idolatry, that under the patronage of Nimrod himself, appearing in the ancient world the serpent of fire and the plains of Shinar seems to have been the grand object of worship. There's the strongest evidence that apostasy, unbelief of the true God, among the sons of Noah began in fire worship, and that in connection with the symbol of the serpent too. On different occasions, that fire was worshipped as the enlightener and the purifier. Now, that's the way it was in the beginning, for Nimrod is singled out by the voice of antiquity as commencing his fire worship. The identity of Nimrod and Ninus has already been proven, and under the name of Ninus also, he's represented as originating the same practice. In a fragment of Apollodorus, it's said that the Ninus taught the Assyrians to worship fire. And I tell you, 9 is Satan's favorite number. The sun, as the great source of light and heat, was worshipped under the name of Baal. Now, the fact that the sun, under that name, was worshipped in the earliest ages of the world, first at Palmyra, the temple of Baal, shows the audacious character of these first beginnings of apostasy. Men have spoken as if the worship of the sun and of the heavenly body was a very excusable thing into which the human race might very readily and very innocently fall into believing. But how? More next on Talk Radio AM 640. It's a Spaceman. This is AVFS. The guy they call Space. This is A View from Space. Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. Now, the Serpent of Fire, the grand object of worship. Nimrod, saying he was the first to pull people into sun worship. The sun, as the great source of light and heat, worshipped under the name of Baal. I was just opening the show with Palmyra and Isis supposedly wrecking all of the great artifacts and statues and relics from ancient city of Palmyra. But the temple of Baal still stands. Through all the centuries, they won't wreck it either. The main god of the Palmyrans was Baal. Assimilated to the Babylonian god Baal Marduk, both gods presided over the movements of the stars, as I told you. Stars, the movement of the stars. Baal was associated with the sun and moon gods, Yaribal and Aglabal, and another heavenly triad, which formed around the Phoenician god Baal Shaman, the Lord of Heaven. I'm speaking to you right now about the religion that's going to be replacing the three monotheistic religions here on earth: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, once they've been demonized and pointed out to be the trouble that has got humankind into the predicament that it is in, almost to the brink of total destruction. Yes, heavenly bodies. Men have spoken as if the worship of the sun and the heavenly bodies was a beautiful thing, in which the human race might be readily, very innocently, gullibly hooked into believing through, of course, science/black magic. According to the primitive language of mankind, the sun was called Shemesh. That is, the servant. That name, no doubt, being divinely given to keep the world in mind of the great truth, that the bounty of the great unseen Creator to his creatures upon earth. Yes, the Creator to his creatures. Men knew this, and yet with the full knowledge of it, they put the servant in the place of the master, and called the son Baal, that is, the Lord, and worshipped him accordingly. What a meaning, then, in the saying of Paul, that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, but changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is God over all, blessed forever. Words of Paul, King James Version of the Bible. The beginning, then, of sun worship and of the worship of the host of heaven was a sin against the light, a presumptuous, heaven-daring sin. As the sun in the heavens was the great object of worship, so fire was worshipped as its earthly representative, I say. To this primeval fire worship, Vitruvius alludes when he says that men were first formed into states and communities by meetings around fires. And this is exactly in conformity with what we have already seen in Phoroneus, who's identified with Nimrod. That while he was said to be the inventor of fire, he was also seen as the first that gathered mankind into communities. Organizing. Cain was the first city builder. Pack 'em and stack 'em and tax 'em. Along with the sun, as the great fire god, and in due time identified with him, was the worshipped serpent. In the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. In Egypt, one of the most commonest symbols of the sun or sun god was a disk with a serpent around it. The original reason of that identification seems to have been that as the sun was the great enlightener of the physical world, so the serpent was held to have been the great enlightener of the spiritual world by giving mankind the knowledge of good and evil. This, of course, implies tremendous depravity on the part of the ringleaders in such a system, considering the period when it began. But such appears to have been the real meaning of the identification. At all events, we have evidence, both scriptural and profane, for the fact that the worship of the serpent began side by side with the worship of fire and the worship of the sun. The inspired statement of Paul from the King James Version of the Bible deems and seems decisive on that subject. It was, he says, when men knew God, but glorified him not as God, that they changed the glory of God not only into an image made unto a corruptible man, but to the likeness of creeping things, that is, of serpents, written in Romans chapter 1, verse 23. With this profane history exactly coincides of profane writers. Sanchuniathon, the Phoenician, who is believed to have lived about the time of Joshua, says, Thoth first attributed something to the divine nature of the serpent and the serpent tribe, in which he was followed by the Phoenicians and Egyptians. Thoth was Osiris's right-hand man. For this animal, the serpent, was esteemed by him to be the most spiritual of all the reptiles, and of a fiery nature, inasmuch as it exhibits an incredible celerity, moving by its spirit, without either hands or feet. What's more, it's long-lived, and has the quality of renewing its youth. Everlasting life? Reborn? As Thoth has laid down in the sacred books upon which accounts his animal is introduced in the sacred rites and mysteries, to be worshipped. Now Thoth, will be remembered, was the counselor of Thamus, that is, Nimrod. From this statement, then, you're led to the conclusion that serpent worship was a part of the primeval apostasy of Nimrod. The fiery nature of worship of the serpent alluded to, it's continually celebrated by the heathen poets. So Virgil, availing himself, he describes, as the author of Pompeii remarks, of the divine nature attributed to serpents. Divine nature attributed to serpents describes the sacred serpent that came from the tomb of Anchises when his son Aeneas had been sacrificing before it. In such terms as illustrate at once the language of the Phoenician and the fiery spirit on the passage before us, reads like this: Scarce had he finished when, with speckled pride, a serpent from the tomb began to glide. His huge bulk on 7 high volumes rolled. Blue was his breadth of back, but streaked with scaly gold. Thus, riding on his curls, he seemed to pass a rolling fire along and singe the grass. It's obvious, then, the fire worship, serpent worship, should be conjoined. The serpent also, as renewing its youth every year, was plausibly represented to those who wished an excuse for idolatry as a symbol of the sun, the great regenerator, who every year regenerates, renews in the face of nature, and who then, when defied, was worshipped as the grand regenerator of the souls of men. You know, the first time that I realized, and I'm a country kid, I learned it out in the country, that snakes shed their skin. I learned that as a little kid. Because you know why? I learned it firsthand. I'm walking along the road and, hey, it looked like a dead snake. I walk over and kick it. It's just the skin. There's nothing in it. He had regenerated his skin, crawled out of it, and slithered away. I, coming upon his old skin lying on the side of the road one day, saw it and learned. And that's where they get it from, this great regenerator idea, this miracle reptile, this one that can, well, renew its youth. It gets new skin. The great fiery serpent is represented with all the emblems of royalty. Back with more. It's Talk Radio, AM 640. I'm the Spaceman. I'm a guy to call Space. This is a View from Space, Talk Radio, AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. P.S. checks in from South Carolina, saying hi on board tonight. Thanks so much for that. And my resident numerologist checks in. SR, I just have to say, you're simply the best. SR writes, Space, hope you're doing well, as he always writes, using simple English gematria. Mirror image reflections, those 3 words, break down to a 252 number. English gematria, A being 1, B being 2. 252, a palindrome number, he says. 9 makes up this entire number. 2 plus 5 plus 2 equals 9. 9 is allegedly Satan's favorite number. Signed SR. Here's the other one. That's a palindrome. The one phrase, mirror, image, reflections. And that's what a palindrome does, doesn't it? Backwards is the same as forwards. Using English gematria, once again, he takes the words, the temple of Baal, breaks down into the number 141. Already has appeared on tonight's show, Talk Radio AM 640, AVFS. 141, of course, another palindrome number. And SR closes the email with saying, what did you say was Letterman's final show day of the year? I say it's 141. May 20th was the 141st day of the year. The sun worshippers are so easy to spot in the world today if you know what you're looking for. The great fiery serpent worshippers. It's represented with all the emblems of royalty. The great fiery serpent, yes, all its heads are encircled with crowns or diadems, and so, in Egypt, the serpent of fire, or serpent of the sun in Greek, was called the basilisk. That is the royal serpent, to identify it with Moloch, which name, while it recalls the ideas of both fire and blood, properly signifies the king. Basilisk, by the way, is also in the Harry Potter book, one of the novels. The basilisk was always among the Egyptians and among many nations, besides regarded as the very type of majesty and dominion, kingly. As such, its images were worn affixed to the headdress of the Egyptian monarchs, and it was not lawful for anyone else to wear it. The sun identified with this serpent was called Purl, which signifies as one the fire and the king. And from this very name, the epithet Puros, the fiery, is given to the great seven-crowned serpent. The word Puros in the text does not exclude the idea of red, for the sun god was painted red to identify him with Moloch, at once the god of fire and god of blood. The main idea, however, is that of fire. Do you remember the Beatle movie Help? Did you ever see that? In it, there's a group chasing after Ringo Starr to make him a blood sacrifice. And, of course, he was to be dyed totally and completely red. Where the red comes from is from the sun. Because with the sun, the great nuclear explosion in the sky is orange when it's peaking in its greatest glory. When it grows cold, it becomes like the Illuminati believed the dog star Sirius. It grew cold. It was a sun like ours and lived its life, went through its orange period, and is now in its white period. Not as effective anymore. Not as hot, not as bright, not as burning. That's where the orange comes from. It is the peak of the sun's magnificence at its best. It starts out yellow, gold, then to the red richness. In ancient Egypt was broken into two parts, the upper and the lower. One was the white king, and the other was the red king. So you see, it's always been with us. See how often those colors come up in the flags of the states around the world, too. So the sun was the great fire god, identified with the serpent, but he also had a human representative. That was Tammuz, for whom the daughters of Israel lamented. In other words, Nimrod. We've already seen the identity of Nimrod in Zoroaster. Zoroaster was not only the head of the Chaldean mysteries, but, as all admit that research this, the head of the fire worshippers. The title given to Nimrod as the first of the Babylonian kings by Berosus indicates the same thing. That title is Aloris, that is, the god of fire. As Nimrod, the god of fire was Molech-Geber, or the mighty king, inasmuch as he was the first who was called Moloch, or king, and the first who began to be mighty, Geber, on the earth. You can see at once how it was that the passing through the fire to Moloch originated, and how the god of fire among the Romans came to be called Molech-Geber, commonly spelled Mulciber, but the Roman C was hard, Molech-Geber, from the epithet Geber. The Parsis of fire worshippers of India are still called Gebers to this very day. I'm the Spaceman. This is AVFS. There's more right after this break on Talk Radio AM 640. Emails to spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com. Thank you for the one that you've sent. I really and truly appreciate it. I really do. And the flattering ones, well, I keep them to myself. I don't mind them, but I just don't present them on the air. But your ideas, your show ideas, your comments, your critiques, I accept and thank you very much for them. So, Nimrod, called by the first of the Babylonian kings, Berosus, the head of the fire worshippers. But it was only after Nimrod's death that he appears to have been deified, made into a god like, well, David Letterman this week. Deified. Back then, Nimrod was worshipped only as the child of the sun, or the sun incarnate. In his own lifetime, though, he set up no higher pretensions than that of being Bolkan, or the priest of Baal, from which the other name of the Roman fire god, Vulcan, is obviously taken from. Everything in the history of Vulcan exactly agrees with that of Nimrod. Vulcan was the most ugly and deformed of all the gods. Nimrod, all over the world, is represented with the features and the complexion of a black man, a Negro. Though Vulcan was so ugly that when he sought a wife, all the beautiful goddesses rejected him with horror, yet destiny, the irrevocable, interposed and pronounced the decree by which Venus, the most beautiful of the goddesses, was united to the most unsightly of the gods. So, in spite of the black and Cushite features of Nimrod, he had for this queen of his, Queen Semiramis, the most beautiful of women. The wife of Vulcan was noted for her infidelities and licentiousness. The wife of Nimrod, very same reputation. Vulcan was the head and chief of the Cyclops, that is, the kings of flame. Nimrod, as universal king, was known as Cuckold, king of the world. And so the emblem of his power was the bull's horns, hence the origin of the cuckold's horns. Kuklops, from cook, king, and lobe, from flame. The flame, the image of the great god, presented with 3 eyes, one in the forehead, hence the story of the Cyclops, with one eye in the forehead. That's the pineal gland location between the eyes in the forehead. The one that connects with the spirit world. Nimrod was the head of the fire worshippers. Vulcan was the forger of the thunderbolts by which such havoc was caused among the enemies of the gods. Ninus, or Nimrod, it was also known, in his wars with the king of Bactria, seems to have carried on the conflict in a very, very similar way. From Arnobius, you learn that the Assyrians, under Ninus, made war against the Bactrians. The warfare was waged not only by the sword and bodily strength, but by magic and by means derived from the secret instructions of the Chaldeans. When you understand that the historical Cyclops are, in fact, by the historian Castor, traced up to the very time of Saturn or Belus, the first king of Babylon, and when you understand that Jupiter, who was worshipped in the very same character as Ninus, the child Nimrod, when fighting against the Titans, received from the Cyclops aid by means of dazzling lightnings and thunders, you get a pretty clear idea then of the magic arts derived here from the Chaldean mysteries which Ninus employed against the Bactrian king. There is evidence that down to a late period, the priests of the Chaldean mysteries knew the composition of the formidable Greek fire which burned underwater. Can you guess what that is? And the secret of which had been lost, and there can be little doubt that Nimrod, in erecting his power, also knew of this scientific secret of water of a flame burning underwater, which he and his associates, by the way, alone possessed. The chemical. It was a chemical. Do you know what the chemical is that burns underwater? Phosphorus! Magic back then. In these, there is an exact coincidence between Vulcan, the god of fire of the Romans, and Nimrod, the fire god of Babylon. In the case of the classic Vulcan, it's only in his character of the fire god as a physical agent that he's popularly represented, but it was in his spiritual aspects, in cleansing, regenerating the souls of men, that the fire worship told most effectually on the world. And I tell you now, the coming Antichrist will have this ability of cleansing and regenerating the souls of men through his fire worship. The power, the popularity, and the skill of this Nimrod, as well as the seductive nature of the system itself, enabled him to spread the delusive doctrine, that sick belief system, far and wide, as he was represented under the well-known name of Phaethon, as on the point of setting the whole world on fire. Or, without the poetical metaphor, of involving all mankind in the guilt of fire worship. The extraordinary prevalence of the worship of the fire god in the early ages of this world is proved by legends found over all the earth, and by facts in almost every place. In Mexico, the natives relate that in primeval times, just after the first age, the world was burnt up with fire. As their history, like the Egyptian, was written in hieroglyphics, it's plain that this must be symbolically understood. In India, they have a legend to the very same effect, though somewhat varied in its form. The Brahmins say that in a very remote period of the past, one of the gods shone with such insufferable splendor, inflicting distress on the universe by his intensely hot beams, brighter than the 1,000 worlds, that unless another more potent god had interposed, cut off his head, the result would have been most disastrous. In the myth, this divinity is represented as the fifth head of Brahma. But as this head is represented as having gained the knowledge that made him so insufferably proud by pursuing the Vedas produced by the other four heads of Brahma, that this shows that he must have been seen as having a distinct individuality. In the Druidic triads of the old British bards, there's a distinct reference, too, to the same event. They say that in primeval times a tempest of fire arose, which split the earth asunder to the great deep, from which none escaped. But the select company shut up together in the enclosure with the strong door, with the great patriarch distinguished for his integrity. That is evidently with Shem, the leader of the faithful, who preserved their integrity when so many made shipwreck, and faith and good conscience went down. These stories all point to one and the same period, and to show how powerful that this form of apostasy was. This unbelief. The papal purgatory of the fires of St. John's Eve, which we have already considered, and many other fables or practices still practiced today, are just so many relics of the same ancient superstition, ritual, sun worship, which is what I talk about every week and follow the Illuminati, who are the sun worshippers, and point it out every week. I'm the play-by-play guy of their events. The great red dragon, or the great fiery serpent, as he's called also in King James Version of the Bible, it'll be seen represented as standing before the woman with the crown of 12 stars. That is, the King James Version of the Bible states is the true church of God, to devour her child as soon as it should be born. Now, this is in exact accordance with the character of the great head of the system of fire worship, Nimrod, as the representative of the devouring fire to which human victims, especially children, were offered in sacrifice, and was seen as the great child devourer. Though at its first deification, he set himself up as Ninus, did Nimrod, or the child. Yet as the first of mankind that was deified, he was of course the actual father of all the Babylonian gods, and therefore seen by the entire world as that character, also known as Phaethon. More on that when I return. Talk Radio AM 640. Say VFS from space. I'm that guy they call space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. This is a view from space. I'd like to communicate with you only one way, by email. Space at 640toronto.com is one of my addresses. The other one is spaceman at 640toronto.com. SG wrote, as said in the book of Ezekiel, the god Tammuz was worshipped by the people of Israel with women weeping over him. Exactly what I was talking about in that last segment. Thanks for that, SG. And Phaethon, though he was known as the child of the sun, is also called the father of the gods in Egypt too. Vulcan was another name for the father of the gods. Phaethon was another name for Nimrod. And I'm wondering, like you maybe, Phaethon, I wonder if that's where the root word for faith came from. The first deified man, all time, Nimrod, after he died, they made him a god. Yes, Nimrod was made a deity, but not worshipped as a deity, only a priest when he was on earth. When he died, he transformed into the master of the gods, just as David Letterman did this past week in his role as the master god of comedy. As the fathers of the gods, Nimrod was also called Kronos, and everyone knows that the classical story of Kronos was that he devoured his sons as soon as they were born. Such an analogy between type and antitype, huh? This legend has a further and deeper meaning. But as applied to Nimrod, or the Horned One, it just refers to the fact that, as the representative of Moloch or Baal, infants, babies, were the most acceptable blood sacrifice offerings at his altar. The Temple of Baal, right there in Palmyra, that has been in the Illuminati-controlled mass media this past week. There's so much evidence on this subject from the records of antiquity. The Phoenicians, says Eusebius, every year their beloved were sacrificed, and only begotten children to Kronos or Saturn, and the Rhodians also often did the same. Diodorus Siculus states that the Carthaginians, on one occasion, when besieged by the Sicilians, and were worried that they had forsaken their old ways, and so in order to rectify this as their supposed error, they quickly chose 200 of the noblest of their children, and publicly sacrificed them to this god to make amends. Yes, you heard me correctly. 200 noblest children publicly sacrificed them to the god to make amends. But it's happening today. You're so gap-jawed at what used to take place. The events that are cleverly disguised as accidents, like the train crash in Spain, and the one that's very, very similar in the United States, Philadelphia, are blood sacrifices. The downed Germanwings aircraft with children aboard, blood sacrifices. This is the reason to believe that the same practice obtained in our land in the times of the Druids is going on today. We know that they offered human sacrifices to their bloody gods. We have evidence that they made their children pass through the fire to Moloch, and that makes it highly probable that they also offered them in sacrifice from Jeremiah 32:35, compared with Jeremiah 19, verse 5. We find that these two things were part of one and the same system. The god whom the Druids worshipped was Baal, as the blazing Baal fires show, and the last cited passage proves that children were offered and sacrificed to Baal, his favorite. When the fruit of the body was so offered, it was for the sin of the soul, it's believed. It was a principle of the Mosaic Law, a principle no doubt taken from the patriarchal faith that the priest must partake of whatever was offered as a sin offering. It's written in Numbers 18, verses 9 through 10. So the priests of Nimrod, or Baal, were required to eat the human sacrifices And that's how it came to be the word Cana Baal. Cannibal was formed. The priest of Baal is the established word in English for cannibal, a devourer of human flesh. The word Cana is the emphatic form of Khan. Khan is a priest, the one in control. Give me the Khan, you get the control. Cana is the priest, the controller. From the historian Castor, an Armenian translation of Eusebius, you read that it was under Baal, or Baalus, that the Cyclops lived. And the scholiast on Aeschylus states that these Cyclops were the brethren of Kronos, who was also Baal. The eye in their forehead shows that originally this name was a name of the great god. For that eye in India and Greece is found the characteristic of the supreme divinity. The Cyclops and Greece go hand in hand. The characteristics of the supreme divinity in the Greek myths. Then they had representatives of that god, in other words, priests of Baal. Now we find that the Cyclops were well known as cannibals too. Referitus Cyclopium, to be exact, to bring back the rights of the Cyclops, meaning to revive the practice of eating human flesh. Now the ancient traditions relate that the apostates who joined in the rebellion of Nimrod waged war on the faithful among the sons of Noah. Power and numbers were on the side of the sun worshipper, but on the side of Shem and the faithful was the mighty power of the King James Version of God's Spirit. Therefore, many were convinced of their sin, arrested in their evil career, and victory, as we have already seen, declared for the saints. The power of Nimrod came to an end, and with that, for a time, the worship of the sun and the fiery serpent associated with it. The wars of the giants against heaven referred to in ancient heathen writers had primary reference to this war against the saints, for men cannot make war on God except by attacking God's people. The ancient writer Eupolemus is quoted by Eusebius saying that the builders of the Tower of Babel were these giants, which statement amounts nearly to the same thing as the conclusion to which we've already come. We've seen that the mighty ones of Nimrod were indeed the giants of iniquity. Epiphanius records that Nimrod was a ringleader among these giants, and that conspiracy, sedition, tyranny were carried on under him. The faithful must have suffered most, as being most opposed to his ambitious and sacrilegious schemes. That Nimrod's reign terminated in some very abrupt, quick flash of a catastrophe. This statement of Syncellus confirms the conclusions to which we've already come to as the nature of that catastrophe that killed Nimrod, referring to the arresting of the tower building scheme. Syncellus Chronographia proceeds this way. But Nimrod would still obstinately stay when most of the other tower builders were dispersed and reside upon the spot nor could he be withdrawn from the tower, still having the command over no contemptible body of men. Upon this, we are informed that the tower, being beat upon by violent winds, gave way, and by the just judgment of God crushed him to pieces. Though this could not be literally true, for the tower stood for many ages after, yet there is considerable amount of tradition to the effect that the tower in which Nimrod glorified was overthrown by wind, which gives reason to suspect that this story, remembering that the same word which signifies the wind signifies also the Spirit of God, it becomes highly probable that the meaning is that this lofty and ambitious scheme by which, in scriptural language, he was seeking to mount up to heaven, to build that stairway to heaven, and set his nest among the stars, was overthrown for a time by the Spirit of God, as we have already concluded, and that in that overthrow he himself, Nimrod, perished, died, was no more. Space back with more. Flip side of this break on Talk Radio AM 640. I'm the guy they call Space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. Emails, the only way I communicate. Space at 640toronto.com, one address, the other spaceman at 640toronto.com. Got some information I'd like to pass along? Just want to say where in the world you're listening to A View from Space from? Feel free. Or if you've got a critique of the show, or just want to say hi. Thanks for the one that you sent. I appreciate them, I really do. So I was saying before the break, the overthrow of Nimrod was possibly by a great wind that blew down his stairway to heaven, his Tower of Babel. He would not leave. He stayed in it. I imagine he went down with the ship and was deified right after by the god, the king of that ancient empire, deified Nimrod, the god of fire. The case was exactly as stated in regards to the antitype, Revelation 12:9. The great dragon, or fiery serpent, was cast out of heaven to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him, and that is the head of the fire worship. And all his associates and underlings were cast down from the power and glory to which they had been raised. Then was the time when the whole gods of the classic pantheon of Greece were fain to flee and hide themselves from the wrath of their adversaries. Then it was that in India, Indra, the king of the gods, Surya, the god of the sun, Agni, the god of fire, and all the rabble-rout of the Hindu Olympus were driven from heaven, wandered over the earth, or hid themselves in forests, disconsolate, and ready to perish of hunger. Then it was that Phaethon, while driving the chariot of the sun, it said, when on one point of setting the world on fire, was smitten by the supreme God and cast headlong to the earth. While his sisters, the daughters of the sun, inconsolably wept for him, as the women wept for Tammuz, as my emailer so graciously pointed out earlier in the show tonight. Then it was, as you must be prepared to see, that Vulcan, or Mulk-Geber, that classic god of fire, was so ignominiously hurled down from heaven, as he himself relates in Homer, speaking of the wrath of the King of Heaven, which his instance must mean God Most High. It It's written, I felt his matchless might, hurled headlong downwards from the ethereal height, tossed all the day in rapid circles round, nor till the sun descended, touched the ground. Breathless I fell, in giddy motion lost. The Scythians raised me on the Lemnian coast. The lines in which Milton referred to the same downfall of Nimrod, though he gives it another application, still more beautifully described the greatness of the overthrow. He wrote, in Ozanian land, men called him Mokaber, and how he fell from heaven they fabled, thrown by angry Jove sheer o'er the crystal battlements. From morn to noon he fell, from noon to dewy eve, a summer's day, and with the setting sun dropped from the zenith like a falling star on Lemnos, the Aegean Isle. Paradise lost. Milton, pretty good writer. The very words strikingly show the tremendous fall of Nimrod, the mighty king, Mokaber, Molk-Geber as he's also known, when suddenly he was cast down from the height of his power and was deprived at once of his kingdom and his life. The Greek poets speak of a couple downfalls of Vulcan. In one case, he was cast down by Jupiter, and the other by Juno. When Jupiter cast him down, it was for rebellion. When Juno did it, one of the reasons especially singled out for doing so was his malformation, that is, his ugliness. Homer's hymn to Apollo. How exactly does this agree with the story of Nimrod? First, he was personally cast down, when by divine authority he was slain. Then he was cast down in effigy by Juno when his image was degraded from the arms of the Queen of Heaven to make way for the fairer child. Now, to this overview, there is very manifest allusion in the prophetic astrophe of Isaiah to the king of Babylon, exulting over his approaching downfall. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? The Babylonian king pretended to be a representative of Nimrod, or Phaethon. And the prophet in these words informs him that, as certainly as the God in whom he glorified had been cast down from his high estate, so certainly should he. And the classic story, Phaethon, of course, is said to have been consumed with lightning. And, as you'll see by and by, Asclepius also died the same death. But the lightning is a mere metaphor for the wrath of the God of the King James Version of the Bible, under which his life and his kingdom had come to an end. When the history is re-examined, the figure stripped off, it turns out, as we've already seen, that he was judicially slain with the sword. Through Orpheus was commonly represented as having been torn in pieces. He too was fabled to have been killed by lightning. When Zoroaster died, he also is said in the myth to have perished by lightning. And therefore, in accordance with that myth, he is represented as charging his countrymen to preserve not his body, but his ashes, the death by lightning. Such is the language of prophecy. And so exactly does it correspond with the character, deeds, and fate of the ancient type of person that it describes, doesn't it? Does it suit the antitype? Could the power of pagan imperial Rome, that power that first persecuted the Church of Christ, that stood by its soldiers around the tomb of the Son of God himself, Jesus Christ, to devour him, if it had been possible, when he should be brought forth as the first begotten from the dead to rule all nations, be represented by a fiery serpent? The birth of the man-child is different from that usually given. But consider if the view which I have taken does not meet all the requirements the case. I think there will be but a few who will assent to the opinion of Mr. Eliot, which in substance amounts to this, that the man-child was Constantine the Great. And when Christianity in his person sat down on the throne of imperial Rome, Constantine, the first supposed Christian leader of the Roman Empire, when Constantine came to the empire, the church indeed, at his throne, when Constantine came there, he was hoping with a little help. Daniel 11:34. But that was all. The Christianity of Constantine was a very doubtful kind. The pagan still had a hold of him. But for political purposes, Constantine accepted Christianity. You see, the pagans saw nothing in it to hinder that, but that when he died, he should be enrolled among the gods. Constantine. But even though it had been better, the description of the woman's child is far too high for Constantine or any Christian emperor that succeeded him on the imperial throne. The man-child, born to rule all nations with a rod of iron, is unequivocally Jesus Christ, as Psalms 2 verse 9, Revelation 19, verse 15, the King James Version of the Bible, emphatically state. True believers, as one with him in a subordinate sense, share in that honor. Revelation 2, verse 27. But to Christ alone, properly, does that prerogative belong? And I think it must be evident that it is his birth that is referred to here. But those who have contended for this view have done injustice to their cause by representing this passage as referring to his literal birth in Bethlehem. When Christ was born in Bethlehem, no doubt Herod endeavored to cut him off, and Herod was the subject of the Roman Empire. But it wasn't from any respect to Caesar that he did that, but simply from fear of danger of his own dignity as the king of Judea. He didn't want to lose his position on space. This is a view from space. That's all it is on Talk Radio AM 640. That's me. I'm the guy that calls space. It's Talk Radio AM 640. This is AVFS, a view from space. SO writes, listening to you from Florida. You've got a bit of information you'd like to pass along to me, or you just want to say hi like SO did just now, or you got a critique of the show, spaceman at 640toronto.com or space at 640toronto.com, the two addresses. Thanks for the one you sent. So as I said before the break, when Herod was killing children because there was this rumor of this Christ child that's to be born, and started killing all of the children, male and female, it wasn't simply from the fear of danger or respect to Caesar that he did this. It was because he didn't want to lose his own dignity as the king of Judea. Because so little did the Caesar of Rome sympathize